Tom Conrad is the Chief Technology Officer and Executive Vice President of Product at Pandora. Tom leads the Pandora product organization, which includes product management, user interface design, software development, and network operations. Over the years, Tom has led numerous engineering and product design teams across a wide range of applications, from OS and enterprise software to video games and consumer websites. Tom began his career at Apple Computer developing user interface elements for the Mac OS. He holds 3 US patents. I think that may be the most impressive thing yet. And a BS in computer engineering from the University of Michigan. Please welcome Tom Conrad. Thank you, Tom.
I'm a little bit nervous about this Game of Thrones chair I'm sitting in. I'm like,
You're in the Iron Throne.
If someone locks the door, I'm going to check for chainmail underneath.
That's right.
Your,
well, fortunately,
shirt.
you just missed the Red Wedding. That's the good news. Tom, if I'm not mistaken, this is the first public event someone at your level has been at where you've post the announcement from Apple. And if I'm wrong, just humor me. How has Apple's introduction of iTunes Radio changed or affected the thinking at Pandora?
You know, I'm just glad they've announced it, frankly, because we've been kind of dealing with this phantom for 9 months now in the press, and it's just nice to know what they're doing and have some sense of when they're going to do it. Pandora's history, it has just kind of this Groundhog Day of some big competitor's going to launch and kill us. You know, when we started the company, the Launchcast was out there and was kind of in the internet radio space, the 800-pound gorilla. AOL had a popular product. Microsoft had a popular product. Then Last.fm came along and they were going to kill us. And then iMeme came along and they were going to kill us. And Playlist.com and MySpace Music and iHeartRadio and Slacker and Stitcher and 14 I'm forgetting, and of course, you know, most recently Spotify. And so it's a little, you know, and every time the press store talks about, like, you've never faced any serious competition before, I'm like, yeah, remember when MySpace had 80 million monthly uniques? So we've faced some pretty powerful competition over the years. I think in a way, what Apple's doing, you know, I think is good for listeners from the standpoint that, you know, they're recognizing, you know, I think what everybody in this room understands is that this kind of very, very easy, ubiquitous medium of radio that has an element where you're of familiarity, where you can sing along, and an element of discovery, doesn't require you to be a music expert and so forth. Like, that is what music consumption looks like in this country, and a lot of the other things that have come and gone are kind of a sideshow. So I guess it's not surprising to me that Apple and others are kind of starting to figure that out. Generally, though, when it comes to competition, my philosophy has been focus on making a great product for our listeners, and you know, if we do that really, really well, the rest kind of sorts itself out.
Well, let me give you my opinion and see what you think about this. My sense of it is that, you know, because I've read some of those same things. This is the Pandora killer, blah, blah, blah. And I look at it and I say, okay, it's the Pandora killer. Why? Because they have an international footprint and Pandora, it doesn't yet. Well, that's fine, except Pandora isn't thriving in those. I mean, kill what? Pandora's not there. You can't kill what isn't there, right? So your market is primarily the US and a few other areas, right? And that's where you're deriving your revenue. So my sense is that, doesn't this potentially open up the market, introduce more people to the idea of streaming who, you know, may never bother with Pandora because they're just busy on their Mac doing their work?
Could well be. We'll see. I don't know. We'll find out in the fall, I guess.
Okay. Talk about the scale of Pandora now. How big is it? How many people are using it right here now today? To the, you know, to
yeah.
The
So they're about. We have 200 million registered users. About 70 million of those have listened in the last 30 days. They listen about 1.5 billion hours a month. Makes us something like 70 or 80% of internet radio and 7.5% or so of all radio in the US. You know, but there are 250 million people that listened to terrestrial radio last week. So still lots and lots and lots of room for growth in terms of reaching a bigger and bigger audience. And Pandora listeners listen about 20 hours a month. Terrestrial radio listeners listen 40 or 50 hours a month. So, we still have a lot of work to do with respect to kind of getting people to bring Pandora into every part of their life that terrestrial radio enjoys today.
So you look at these numbers, and for you, there's nothing but blue sky. There's a lot of upside there.
Certainly lots left to do just in the US, and as you point out, there's another 6.5 billion people out there that have no access to Pandora or anything like Pandora. So we're, our ambitions are, billions of listeners listening, tens of billions of hours a month, so.
Mm-hmm. Are you honestly surprised at all by the scale of this?
Oh my God, absolutely. I'm flabbergasted. When we, yes. When we started this thing, for sure to me, 1 million listeners looked like success. When we launched on the iPhone in the summer of 2008, we had 13 million listeners, and I would have had exactly the same reaction to the question. I would have said 13 million is beyond, my wildest dreams for what we might be able to achieve with this. At every turn, it surprises me.
How do you see the radio industry overall kind of reacting to Pandora as an industry, and what's your assessment of that?
I think that there's been a lot of smart moves in the last 2 or 3 years. You see, Clear Channel really embracing digital and embracing things like personalization. You see, almost everybody in terrestrial radio embracing mobile as a delivery mechanism. All of that has kind of happened in the last couple of years. There's maybe a part of me that was a little surprised that it took as long as it did for the big radio operators to kind of make IP-based delivery of radio kind of a core competency. But we've seen a lot of progress in that dimension. I think that there's lots and lots of stuff that terrestrial radio does really successfully that we've yet to approach. Things like really integrating in with local communities, things like on-air personality, certainly spoken word content. There's just all kinds of things that are strengths of traditional radio that have yet to kind of find a place in Pandora. So I think, kind of on both sides, if there are two sides, there are things to learn.
Well, let's talk about that for a sec, because the things you mentioned that are elements of traditional radio, the question a lot of traditional broadcasters ask is that on the roadmap for Pandora?
I think, we are a very, very focused company. The entire thing of Pandora that you're familiar with, on the web and on all these mobile phones and, 1,000 different consumer electronics devices and, 80 plus automobiles and things was basically built by 25 engineers. And the only way that we found any success at all is by being really, really focused and very thoughtful about the things that we choose to do. And for me, the guiding principle is always, as we tackle new things, is this something that we can be the very best in the world at? Is there some element to our approach that allows us to really differentiate ourselves from other players? I'm sure that some of the things that I enumerated as differentiating points are things that we will tackle eventually, but I think, I get up every morning to make the very, very best personalized playlist for the 70 million people that are going to tune in that month, and we still have plenty of work to do there. So, I'm sure down the road there'll be other things that we expand into, but right now I feel like the work in front of us is to kind of continue this mission of creating the perfect soundtrack for people's lives.
You say there's plenty of work to do there. What kind of work are you referring to?
I'll tell you a funny story. And I think in some ways this is maybe the most important point of differentiation from how we've approached the opportunity versus some of the other players. Everything that we've done over the years has taught that the playlist, what songs you play, in what order, with what amount of repetition, with what amount of discovery, how does that experience change over a day, a month, a year, multiple years of listening? That matters, an order of magnitude more than anything else that we do. We can add, social features and lean-in features and power user features until the cows come home, and Doesn't move the needle at all. Make our playlists better in some demonstrable way. All the metrics move in the right direction. People listen longer. They tell more friends about it. They come back more often. One of my favorite kind of stories from Pandora's history is when we launched on the iPhone, this strange thing started to happen, which is I would talk to people about their experience using Pandora on the phone, and they would say that they're falling in love with it, and they just liked the playlists on the phone so much better than they liked the playlists on the website, which I thought was really strange because it's exactly the same servers generating exactly the same playlists, and I had developed all of these kind of ridiculous theories about like, well, it's kind of this, imagined thing that because the device is more personal and you carry it around with you and you have a more intimate relationship with it, so that's not all a bunch of bullshit. And then I thought to ask this question: when was the last time you listened to Pandora on the web? And they would say, oh, back when you launched, 4 years ago. I didn't like it very much, so I never went back. Well, Pandora was, pretty terrible on the web when it launched because the playlist that we started with, we had a lot of development of the core intellectual property in front of us. And by the time the iPhone came around, we'd made some really dramatic improvements. And I think in the 5 years since then, the playlists have materially improved. I hope 5 years from now we'll look back and think the playlists are pretty terrible today. And I just don't think that anyone else is really tackling the problem with that focus, right? I mean, it's awfully easy to create a user interface that lets you type in, the Cure and have something spit out the other side called the Cure Radio. But, do you come back every single day and challenge yourself to make it better? I'm not sure that there's anybody else that's really doing that. In fact, most people are outsourcing it to another company.
What is the key then that makes, what you're saying is that your playlist is actually better? How?
So we do kind of three things all at once. Only one of which gets talked about a lot. It's actually it's not for lack of telling the story, but there's one piece that just seems to really resonate, and that's the story of the Music Genome Project. So, the company has about 30 professional musicians who come to the office every day. They put headphones on. They listen to each and every song that will ultimately play on Pandora. They analyze those songs across hundreds of different musicological dimensions. Not just are there guitars, but what kind of guitars, how are the guitars played. There are 40 attributes to describe the vocal performance alone. And that gives us an understanding of the music itself, which allows us to make musicological matches between songs. So when you say, you like U2, we have an understanding of what U2 means musically, and we can go off into the music universe and find other things that are musicologically similar. And what's so empowering about that is that we can make those musicological matches completely ignoring popularity, culture. Like, it really levels the playing field for artists and does allow people that are recording music in their garage to kind of find their way onto stations with where other techniques would kind of fail them. So that oftentimes is where the story stops about Pandora, and truthfully, that was where the story roughly stopped when we launched in 2005. But there are two other critical ingredients. The first is that we give you this ability to give a thumbs up and a thumbs down as we play music for you, which then allows us to algorithmically refine the music that we play for you specifically. So maybe if you start a Beatles radio station, maybe it's really that kind of British invasion sound that is what you're looking for. Or maybe you're looking for something that's more like the later part of the Beatles catalog that's a little bit more experimental, like kind of Phil Spector wall of sound stuff. And so by giving your feedback, you can tune the station in one direction or another, so your Beatles station ends up completely different from mine. So we did a bit of that when we launched. That part of Pandora has become dramatically enhanced over the years as well. But it's really the third ingredient where like kind of the magic starts to happen, which is we not only have your feedback, but we have tens of billions of pieces of additional feedback from all of the other listeners in Pandora. And we know about their gender, their age, what part of the country they live in, the other music they listen to. And so that lets us before you give any feedback at all, have a much better hypothesis about what kind of Beatles station you might be looking for, because we can find other people that kind of look like you. You know, think about just someone who's, you know, starting a Drake station on the East Coast. You know, it's just intuitive that they have a different set of expectations than someone starting the same station on the West Coast. So we can make a better initial guess using all of that kind of, you know, to throw the buzzword around, big data, but then kind of refine it. If we get it wrong, you refine it to your particular taste through this thumbs up and thumbs down process. And it's kind of that virtuous cycle of Music Genome provides the initial hypothesis, your feedback tunes it to your taste, that puts more thumbs into the system, which makes us more smart, intelligent in the kind of cold start moment where we don't know very much about you in terms of which songs work. And so it's just about kind of constantly challenging ourselves to enhance those algorithms. I mean, I think one of the common qualitative critiques of Pandora that I hear is that there's too much repetition. People say, oh, you've got, you know, 1 million songs, not 20 million songs. I feel like I hear the same songs a lot. It must be because your catalog isn't big enough. Certainly we're failing that person, that individual, and we spend a lot of time talking about how can we make sure that for that person, the person that's kind of complaining about variety, that they get more variety. But I can also tell you that the level of variety in Pandora dramatically varies from station to station to station, seed to seed to seed, and the system is learning what that audience is willing to tolerate with respect to repetition. I'm gonna tell you, like, the Drake audience, they want 75 songs all day, every day, over and over and over. Someone who types in Beethoven to Pandora is happy to listen to 3,000 different musical compositions. And we'll look at that Drake number, for example, and just say, God, that seems like a really small number. Let's work to, like, artificially, like, bump it up, and the crowd just pounds it right back down to 75. We need to find better ways to make sure that that person who listens to Drake that's a little bit outside of the typical case is satisfied and gets more variety. That's kind of still work that's in front of us. But those are the kind of conversations we have.
Okay. When it comes to just music listening, how similar do you know or think a Pandora listener is to a radio listener? In other words, is a radio listener just a future Pandora listener who hasn't discovered it yet? Or is there some other qualitative difference from a music standpoint? I mean, obviously, information and entertainment is a different story.
Right. I mean, I guess, you know, I think radio listeners broadly look a lot like America. And at this point, Pandora looks a lot like America. Our demographic mix, our gender mix, our geographic distribution, you know, it looks very, very, very mainstream. Even with respect to the most common starting points, the most spun songs on Pandora, they look a lot like what's going on in pop culture. So I think those suggest that this isn't some kind of small segment of the mainstream radio audience, but it is, we're starting to draw from all corners. I mean, we're still, you know, just 7.5%, so we're still kind of just starting out.
You talk about how things like traffic, weather, spoken word, these elements, entertainment, are down the road. You want to get this formula right first before you worry about that. I'm wondering, I'm sure they're not all equally down the road. I'm sure you've had internal conversations saying, you know, some of this is lower hanging fruit than others. If you could be Pandora music plus one non-music element, what would it be?
I try to be pretty careful about talking about, like, what we might do.
I know, and I'm trying to get the question right.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say this. This is a vague and annoying answer, but I have this very distinct memory of listening to, like, the music choice stations on cable back before we started Pandora, back kind of when you could first get kind of, you know, channel 700 through 800 or whatever. And I remember this feeling that even in the moments where the song selection was really working for me, that it felt a little robotic, a little kind of like a computer picking songs for me. I suspect Pandora suffers from that same problem for some people. I think this is just me talking. I think my own ambition probably is to understand that phenomenon better and to look for ways to add some life to Pandora, probably in the context of music, before we go to further afield into things like, can we create a personalized spoken word talk or sports experience or something.
I think you gave more of an answer probably than you wanted to with that one. I like that. As the Pandora experience evolves, it appears to me that, in essence, the experiences actually remain quite consistent. And you could argue that that's a key strength of the brand, its simplicity, its consistency over time, as to why it's scaled the way it has. I wonder if you're worried, though, that, as in the MySpace case, there are bright and shiny objects everywhere. And some of the bright and shiny objects come with very deep pockets and very great distribution. Do you worry about that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you never stop worrying about that. I mean, you picked on like an interesting thing, which is that this sort of the kind of vague qualitative sense that Pandora has stayed essentially the same since we launched in 2005. Tell us about an artist or a song, maybe a genre, and we make a station that you can personalize, and the core elements of the user interface have stayed almost exactly the same. Up in San Francisco, where I live and work, like innovation is often like measured in like the tonnage of pixels you change a year. And I have to pretty routinely deflect the critique that we're not reinventing the experience of Pandora enough with each passing quarter or month. What we do a lot of is we build experiences for segments of our audience. So we have a pretty robust social experience, for example. We have a pretty robust kind of lean-in music browsing, music information experience. We have a pretty robust community of people who just spend time commenting on artists and communicating back and forth with each other on Pandora. Those are all features that have been added from the beginning. And a lot of companies would make them kind of big, fat, blinking buttons on the homepage or in the core UI. We kind of make the opposite decision. We make the decision to kind of leave them underneath the surface of the water and to let the segment that's interested in them discover them. Comfortable with the risk that some of those people might not find the feature and therefore be disappointed because maybe they think we don't have it. But that's, I think, kind of a reasonable trade-off when you believe that maybe 70 or 80% of the audience isn't interested in those features at all. They just want this really simple experience of, press a button, music that they love comes out. So we try not to do anything that might take away from those people's experience as we try to satisfy these other segments. And I don't know that we get the formula right every single time. But I feel, I feel like it is kind of the North Star for us to remember that we're not the end user, we're not the listener. I think actually in some ways, like that's why there have been so many on-demand services or kind of music communities or places to go to keep a complete history of every concert you've ever been to. Like these are services that are built for people who are very, very lean-in music fans who, do love to build that relationship with the tattooed guy behind the counter at the local college record store that, are buying vinyl. Like that's the kind of people who start digital music companies. I mean, I'm that person. But there's just not very many of us. And so I think part of why we've found some success is that really early on we understood where people really listen to music, and it's in the context of this thing called radio.
One of the rules that I had for research was if I was ever doing a focus group on a music station, there was a musician in the room, kick him out because he's characteristic of no one and nothing. Let me ask you a question that was asked of me by someone in this room, or at least I think he's still in this room. Pandora, the statement was made that Pandora would be better off selling itself more like a radio station in the sense that that Pandora has an awful lot of listeners and can carve those listeners up with a great deal of precision if it wanted to. So my question is, beyond location, beyond gender, beyond age, device, what plans does Pandora have to kind of gather and aggregate deeper lifestyle information? If I wanted to know the people who go to concerts, can I get that from Pandora? If I wanted to know people who are going to buy new cars, can I get that from Pandora?
Definitely, with our, just setting aside the opportunity in terrestrial radio and that kind of the people who typically buy advertising in that context, we're also by hours of engagement a month, depending on who you believe, either the largest or the second largest mobile application in the application in any category. There's some, depending on whose research you believe, it's either us or it's Facebook. And so as a result, there's an opportunity in sort of digital advertising to capture the dollars that are going into that segment. But the competition there really is these big behemoths. And in many instances, they do have insights that go beyond, your age, your gender, what kind of music you like. Facebook has a pretty 360-degree view of you. Right. Google has a pretty 360-degree view. So I think for us to be able to take advantage of the opportunity we have in mobile, we have to think pretty deeply about how we might be able to offer some of that deeper level of insights to advertisers. And that's a program that's kind of in its in development at Pandora. It's a tricky landscape, though, right? I mean, you want to be really, really respectful of people's privacy and their identity, and so trying to navigate that all in a way that respects that dimension is something that's important to us, and so we're kind of going slowly.
The competitors that you mentioned, to be clear, those are competitors without an audio platform. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that is a distinction that you have.
Sure. Although, I think what we're seeing in mobile, so again, there's two categories. There's the traditional radio buyer. That's kind of one audience to speak to. Mm-hmm. And then there's the traditional digital advertiser, where they used to advertise on the web. Now they're moving more and more dollars to mobile. And I think that group they think about mobile as a native ad platform. And so, they go and they look at a popular application like Facebook and they say, well, what are the native ad units? Not a banner, but like what feels like it's part of Facebook, what feels like it's part of Twitter, what feels like it's part of Pandora. And so that to them, audio is our native ad unit. And it certainly has all kinds of power. I think there's a reasonable chance that the best ad you can buy on Facebook is an audio ad on Pandora. Because we're so often running in the background while people are on Facebook. But we, at the end of the day, we really are in that domain competing with, are they going to put their dollars into sponsored tweets or into sponsored news stories or in our native unit, the audio ad? Mm-hmm.
One of the other things that you do, obviously, to promote the Pandora One paid tier, one of the benefits is it's commercial free. So you're in a position of saying, you won't hear any ads if you go to Pandora One. Some advertisers might argue that unsells ads, or at least paints them as evil. What do you say to that?
I think we've tried to be really careful about that for exactly that reason. I mean, the Pandora One exists not as the kind. Pandora's not a typical freemium model. I mean, it's not this funnel where you say we want to get people into the free tier and then cram them through to subscription at the highest possible rate. The economics for us are pretty similar. It's funny, people all the time come up to me and say,
what does that mean? I'm sorry, that the economics are similar.
The profitability of a subscriber for us is not that different from a profitability of an advertising-based listener. And it gets complicated because the royalty rates are higher for subscription. The segment that's likely to subscribe tends to listen more. We pay per track for the licensing, so they cost us more. So it's not to say that we're making $3 per user on an advertising basis, but the costs are different underneath it. So Pandora's not this freemium model where we're trying to convert people from tempt them with the free thing and get them to pay. It rather exists primarily for people who are sensitive to advertising. And there's there is a segment of the audience, small single digits, that just want to eliminate advertising wherever they can from their life, and they're willing to pay money to do that. And so at some level, I think advertisers recognize that they're going to really struggle to reach those people anyway. So it's almost better to have them taken out. It's only 2% or something of the total reach. So it doesn't really, in an interesting way, diminish the pool that they can talk to. But it takes out the people who are they're kind of disproportionately expensive to talk to because they're just not going to pay attention.
Wouldn't there be a benefit to you to kind of power up Pandora One in the sense of offer more value to those people, potentially even for more money, so that they could become more of a... Because the thing about Pandora is that, Pandora One is the most experience you can have with Pandora. And that experience is essentially the rest of Pandora, less ads. What about, to put it in a public radio model, for example, people give so they can be part of something more, not something less. Mm-hmm. And have you given any thought going forward to how to make Pandora One more of an attraction, more of a destination, more of a reason why 5% should join rather than 2%?
Yeah, I think the challenge there is mostly this. We're happy to kind of add benefits to the subscription product that we think appeal to some specific niche. There are things in Pandora One that go beyond the commercial-free experience. There's a desktop application. We stream at a higher bit rate. Some of the restrictions of the free version of Pandora, the monthly listening cap, and some of the skip limits and things are relaxed in the context of Pandora One. And so we look for opportunities to differentiate the two. But we're also, our ambition is to build a product that talks to hundreds of millions of listeners every month, if not billions. And we're just conscious that you're never going to have that kind of impact with a subscription product. Okay. And so what we want to be careful to do is to not take core features out of Pandora, put them behind subscription, because it's essentially taking them away from the mainstream audience that would otherwise enjoy them. So there's just this kind of balancing act.
Okay. Last question, then I want to open it up to the crowd. The cap, you mentioned the cap. Can you detail the consequences of that cap as you see them? What has it meant for Pandora, good and bad?
So there's actually, there's 2 chapters to the cap story. The first time that we ever instituted a cap was on the website. And it was the same cap that we have in mobile today. It was 40 hours of ad-supported free listening a month. When you got to the end of your 40th hour, we would invite you to either spend 99 cents to continue listening for the rest of the month, to subscribe to Pandora One on a kind of recurring basis for $36 a year, or just to come back, when the next month kicked over. Most people are going to hit this cap in the last few days of the month, so that's actually a pretty attractive offer. I'll come back in 4 days. And we did that because in the internet radio space, there's this disconnect between your costs, which is entirely derived from how much are people listening, from your revenue, which is entirely derived by how much advertising can you sell in the market. And when you're growing really, really fast, there's this kind of lag between audience building and the advertising community recognizing that audience, right? So if you're selling a campaign in June that's going to run in October, the advertiser is looking at the third-party measurement of your audience in June, and they're saying, well, we're not going to make a buy that assumes you're going to have this crazy growth trajectory between now and October when the campaign runs. So you don't get credit for the audience you're building until it shows up in the third-party reporting and the sales cycle kind of catches up. Which means that even with a perfectly executing sales team, it's really, really, really hard to fill that gap of inventory. And so during hypergrowth, you kind of naturally, you struggle to fill inventory at 70, 80, 90%. Ironically, as growth slows, those things cross and it gets easier. And that's what happened on the web. We went through this period of just hyper growth on the web, a sales team that was doubling its number every year, but the web was growing at more than that. And so we kind of closed that gap, gave ourselves some control over that phenomenon by introducing this cap. We ran with that for a couple of years. Our ad products matured. The growth moderated a little bit as we were as some of the audience moved to mobile. Advertisers found a bunch of success with us and started, selling just became easier because they were repeat buys. And so we were able to eliminate the cap. So in that period though, we never implemented a cap on mobile in the theory that it was still the de minimis case. Maybe at that point it was 80% web, 20% mobile. And we really believed that the ultimate opportunity for Pandora was to get it, kind of set free from the PC, and we didn't want to do anything to slow that growth. So now we find ourselves kind of in the reverse position. Now mobile is 80%, and we have this hyper growth, and some of the same kind of advertising effects that I was describing in the web, made somewhat worse by the fact that mobile advertising is an entirely new medium, and advertisers are really still figuring out how to spend really big dollars in the category. And so we've implemented this cap just to give us some controls again over the pace of expenses as they relate to the revenue generation. In both instances, it felt completely counter to our mission to implement the caps. And this is not something that we hold up as like, gosh, here's a great moment. We came up with this really clever way to improve the economics of Pandora. Isn't this awesome? Our ambition is to entertain people, throughout their day. We're envious of the 40 or 50 hours a month that the typical radio listener spends with terrestrial radio. And obviously a cap kind of runs against that. So we hope it's just another chapter that eventually will close out and move on.
And how has it impacted you so far from a usage standpoint?
I'm trying to think. This is where like the SEC puts me in jail if I say the wrong thing.
Say the right thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna try. I think we Q1. I suspect it's the same in the terrestrial world. Is seasonally the toughest quarter for us. It's been, you look at all our public filings. It's very clear it was true when we were a private company as well. But we had a great Q1 this year. Wall Street seems to think that we've really turned the corner on mobile monetization, and it was also the first quarter that we had the capping mechanism in place to allow us to control some of those dials. I think you'll see, I guess one public thing we've talked about is that our market share went from about 8% to 7.5% after the cap was implemented. So that gives you a sense of like the impact of forcefully reducing hours.
Tom, we are out of time. Tom Conrad is the Chief Technology Officer and Executive Vice President of Product at Pandora. Tom, thank you so much for being here. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.